Hitler's rise and Germany's defiance of Versailles, 1935. In 1935, Adolf Hitler held virtually unchecked power in Germany, and the world watched with growing unease. His vehement opposition to the post-World War I settlement, particularly the Treaty of Versailles, was no secret, though how far he would push his agenda remained uncertain. The year began with a notable public relations victory for Nazi Germany. The Saarland, a coal-rich region under League of Nations administration since the end of the Great War, voted overwhelmingly to rejoin Germany. This referendum not only emboldened Hitler but signaled the growing influence of the Nazi regime. In March, Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe, confirmed that Germany was actively rebuilding its air force, openly flouting Versailles restrictions. 2 weeks later, Hitler escalated his defiance by reintroducing military conscription, ordering the creation of an army of 36 divisions, totaling 500,000 men. Germany's naval expansion also violated treaty restrictions, with the launch of a new U-boat in the summer. Britain initially attempted diplomacy, seeking concessions from Hitler in exchange for limiting Germany's rearmament and possibly rejoining the League of Nations. However, the alarming scope of Hitler's ambitions increasingly divided political opinion in both Britain and France, with factions favoring appeasement, deterrence, or a blend of both. The central dilemma across Europe was whether Hitler's objectives could be accommodated peacefully or whether a more robust, coordinated military strategy was necessary. To address this, in April, Britain, France, and Italy met at Stresa in Piedmont, pledging joint action to oppose further violations of Versailles and to protect Austria's independence. While the Stresa Front seemed to offer hope for unified European resistance, Britain's unilateral naval agreement with Germany just 2 months later undermined the pact, infuriating France and Italy. British planners argued that the deal limited the Kriegsmarine to 35% of the Royal Navy's strength, reducing the threat of a two-front naval war with Germany and Japan. French Prime Minister Pierre Laval viewed this as betrayal, while Mussolini concluded that his Stresa partners respected only strength. These early events in 1935 reflected the fragility of collective security in Europe, as nations grappled with strategic priorities, domestic pressures, and the rising threat posed by Hitler's aggressive policies. Italy's conquest of Ethiopia and the League of Nations' weakness in the autumn of 1935. Benito Mussolini launched his long-planned invasion of Ethiopia, one of the few remaining independent African states, in a bold attempt to establish a new Roman Empire. Despite Italy's clear military superiority, Mussolini feared international intervention and counted on the League of Nations to issue protests without meaningful action. The League condemned Italy for violating Article 12 of the League Covenant, but imposed economic sanctions that were limited, poorly enforced, and notably excluded oil. Non-member nations such as the United States, Germany, and Japan were unaffected, further undermining the sanctions' effectiveness. In practice, the penalties inflicted minimal economic harm on Italy, demonstrating the League's inability to enforce collective security. Meanwhile, in Germany, Hitler welcomed both the collapse of the Stresa Front and the League's impotence as evidence of the weakening international order. Domestically, the Nazi government cemented its ideology with the passage of the Reich Citizenship Law and the Law for the Protection of German Blood and Honor, stripping Jews of citizenship and banning marriages between Jews and Aryans. These measures illustrated the regime's commitment to racial purity and its consolidation of internal control. Globally, 1935 marked an escalation in militarization, with Italy, Japan, and Germany all pursuing imperial ambitions. Britain, preoccupied with multiple colonial concerns, including unrest in Palestine, India, and Egypt, sought to avoid confrontation in Europe. Arab revolts in Palestine against British rule and Jewish immigration, coupled with Gandhi and Nehru's independence campaigns in India, consumed British attention, making European conflicts seem increasingly distant in their strategic priorities. France, anticipating German aggression, fortified its borders with the Maginot Line, a sophisticated chain of fortifications designed to deter direct attacks. Though critics like Charles de Gaulle warned that mechanization, rather than static defenses, would be essential against modern warfare. Meanwhile, Joseph Stalin pursued the Soviet Union's industrial and military expansion through the Second Five-Year Plan, aiming to match Germany's growing power while remaining uncertain from which direction a threat would emerge. These developments highlighted the fragility of international security and the growing gap between the ambitions of aggressive states and the limited capacity of others to respond. Escalating tensions and the remilitarization of the Rhineland by early 1936. Hitler's ambitions were clear, and European powers struggled to respond. France attempted to bolster security by renewing its alliance with the Soviet Union, ratifying a treaty of mutual assistance intended to deter German aggression through the threat of a two-front war. In reality, the treaty lacked actionable military collaboration, offering Hitler a propaganda opportunity to portray Germany as encircled. Seizing the moment, Hitler ordered German troops to remilitarize the Rhineland, in direct violation of both the Versailles Treaty and the Locarno Pact. This strategic gamble, risking confrontation with France and Britain, proved successful. Neither nation was willing to engage in war. Their military forces were unprepared, and public opinion strongly favored peace. German troops occupied the Rhineland without opposition, a move that significantly enhanced Hitler's domestic popularity while exposing the weakness and indecision of European powers. The remilitarization not only emboldened Hitler but also set a precedent for future breaches of international agreements. Meanwhile, Italy's military campaign in Ethiopia continued, demonstrating the limits of international sanctions. Despite Italy's technological and chemical weapons superiority, Ethiopian resistance was formidable until the decisive Battle of Machu, after which Italian forces captured Addis Ababa. Victor Emmanuel III proclaimed himself Emperor of Ethiopia, consolidating Italy's African colonies into Italian East Africa. Emperor Haile Selassie fled into exile and delivered a powerful speech to the League of Nations in Geneva, denouncing Italian aggression. Yet the League's failure to enforce sanctions effectively reinforced the perception that collective security was ineffectual, providing a blueprint for future acts of aggression by other authoritarian regimes. Japan, simultaneously, grappled with internal militarist factions seeking to eliminate moderate politicians and expand control in China, leading to the February 26 incident coup attempt, which ultimately failed. Nevertheless, Japan continued expansion in northern China, establishing puppet governments in Inner Mongolia, while Chiang Kai-shek was forced into an uneasy second united front with the communists, uniting against Japan but creating internal political tension. Collectively, these events underscored the volatility of global politics, where aggressive states acted decisively while international institutions struggled to respond. Civil war in Spain and the rise of fascist alliances. Spain became the next epicenter of political instability in 1936, illustrating the global surge of polarization and the collapse of democratic stability. The left-wing Popular Front coalition won elections, prompting violent backlash from right-wing nationalists. By July, army officers had launched a coup, seizing key territories including Morocco, the Canary Islands, and Seville, while the Republican government maintained control over major cities. Civilian militias armed on both sides turned the nation into a battlefield, setting the stage for a brutal three-year civil war. General Francisco Franco emerged as the leader of the nationalist forces, declaring himself head of state by October. Despite public agreements not to intervene, foreign powers became involved. The Soviet Union supported the Republican side with weapons and advisors, while Fascist Italy sent troops, black-shirt militias, and aircraft to assist Franco. Hitler also contributed air units, known as the Condor Legion, gradually tipping the balance in favor of Franco's nationalists. This conflict served as a proxy for the growing ideological struggle in Europe between fascism, communism, and democracy, demonstrating the willingness of authoritarian regimes to manipulate foreign conflicts to serve their ambitions. Meanwhile, in Berlin, the 1936 Summer Olympics offered Hitler and Joseph Goebbels an unparalleled propaganda opportunity. International guests were dazzled by displays of German organization, unity, and technological prowess, while overt anti-Semitism was temporarily suppressed for appearances. Hitler's public image benefited immensely, showcasing a nation restored economically and politically, and projecting the illusion of peaceful intentions. Behind the scenes, however, Hitler's ambitions were far from conciliatory as he secretly initiated the four-year plan, a strategy designed to prepare Germany for inevitable conflict against the Soviet Union and what he termed Judeo-Bolshevism, with a focus on domestic production of key war materials. The convergence of propaganda, rearmament, and foreign intervention revealed a Europe in which aggressive states were increasingly confident, while democratic powers and international organizations were fragmented and ineffective. The Rhine-Berlin Axis and global repercussions in late 1936. A diplomatic realignment further solidified Hitler's position. Italy, having abandoned the Stresa Front due to tensions over Ethiopia, formed a new alliance with Germany, the Rhine-Berlin Axis. This partnership committed both nations to support Franco's nationalists in Spain, combat communism, and pursue respective colonial ambitions. The alliance significantly strengthened fascist influence in Europe, challenging the credibility of Britain and France, while simultaneously signaling to the world that authoritarian regimes could act with impunity. Domestically in Britain, King Edward VIII's abdication in December over his intention to marry an American divorcee removed a monarch sympathetic to Hitler. Yet his previous actions had highlighted lingering pro-Nazi sentiment among some elites. In the United States, isolationism dominated public opinion. A 1936 survey indicated that 95% of Americans opposed involvement in future overseas conflicts. Reflecting this sentiment, Congress passed neutrality laws forbidding arms sales to warring nations, a stance motivated by the belief that American involvement in World War I had been costly and unnecessary. US policymakers hoped to avoid entanglement in Europe as global tensions mounted, leaving authoritarian powers free to expand their influence, largely unchallenged. The combination of fascist expansion in Europe, Japanese aggression in Asia, and American isolationism created a precarious international environment. where conflicts abroad could intensify without immediate risk of intervention from major democratic powers. Meanwhile, dictators like Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, and militarist factions in Japan leveraged propaganda, secret police, and centralized control to consolidate power internally while projecting strength externally, setting the stage for further upheaval in the coming years. The international stage and the rise of modern dictators. The mid-1930s witnessed the emergence of powerful dictators who reshaped international relations through militarization, propaganda, and ruthless internal control. Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, and nationalist Chinese leaders harnessed modern media, indoctrinated populations, eliminated political rivals, and pursued territorial expansion. Italy's conquest of Ethiopia, Germany's remilitarization of the Rhineland, and Japan's advances in China highlighted the inadequacy of international institutions like the League of Nations, which consistently failed to enforce collective security. In Europe, the ideological divide was stark, with leftist governments in France and Spain struggling against fascist challenges, while Franco's nationalists benefited from foreign support. The 1936 Olympics in Berlin demonstrated the Nazis' capacity to blend propaganda with spectacle, concealing their militaristic and racial agendas from the international community. Behind the scenes, Hitler's four-year plan prioritized autarky and war preparation, signaling an inevitable confrontation with the Soviet Union. Mussolini's alignment with Germany through the Rome-Berlin axis further cemented the fascist bloc, undermining previous diplomatic frameworks such as the Stressefront. Across the Atlantic, American isolationism ensured that the United States would largely observe these developments from a distance, leaving Europe vulnerable to unchecked aggression. Globally, these trends illustrated the rising confidence of authoritarian regimes, the fragility of democratic institutions, and the failure of collective security, creating a volatile environment where ambitious leaders pursued empire building with near impunity. This era set the stage for World War II, a devastating conflict that would test the resilience of nations, the limits of diplomacy, and the consequences of appeasement, leaving an indelible mark on the 20th century. For those interested in exploring the actions of extreme leaders further, modern documentary series like Mad Kings highlight the brutal and bizarre behaviors of historical despots, offering insights into the human cost of unchecked power and ambition.